Did you reject a one-on-one meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, I did.
Why?
Because his tariffs are too high and he doesn't seem to want to move, and I've told him forget about it. And frankly, we're thinking about just taxing cars coming in from Canada. That's the mother lode. That's the big one. We're very unhappy with the negotiations and the negotiating style of Canada. We don't like their representative very much. They've taken advantage. I love Canada, by the way. I have so many friends. I have everybody. It's so many friends. But that has nothing to do with this. I'm representing the United States. I must be honest with you. We're not getting along at all with their negotiators. We think their negotiators have taken advantage of our country for a long time. We had people that didn't know what they were doing. And that's why we had, over the last 5 or 6 years, if you average it out, we had $800 billion a year in trade losses. It's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. If Canada doesn't make a deal with us, we're going to make a much better deal. We're going to tax the cars that come in. We will put billions and billions of dollars into our treasury. And frankly, we'll be very happy because it's actually more money than you can make under any circumstance with making a deal.
We continue to engage in near continuous negotiations. The conversations are constant and ongoing. We are very much looking in a positive, constructive way to getting to a renewed Nafta that will be a trilateral agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. As I've said many times, I will not negotiate in public. We will continue to stay focused on getting a good deal for Canadians, recognizing that it is very possible to get to a deal that is both good for Canadians, good for Americans, and good for the entire continent. We will stay focused on that. We will keep working as long as it takes to get to the right deal for Canada. The issue of 232 tariffs writ large and indeed specifically was his insistence that, well, if we renegotiate NAFTA, if we get to a NAFTA deal, there will be no need to worry about these other things. That has been something that he has said a few times. We are continuing to work on getting to a right deal for Canada, right deal for Canadians, and that involves obviously feeling confident about the path forward as we move forward, if we do, on a NAFTA 2.0, and the freer and lack of punitive tariffs that we consider are unjust.
Did you reject a one-on-one meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, I did.
Why?
Because his tariffs are too high and he doesn't seem to want to move, and I've told him forget about it.
Donald Trump is making trade tensions deeply personal. Using insults, hyperbole, and threats, the president took fresh aim at Canada and the Foreign Affairs Minister leading the Canadian NAFTA negotiating team.
And frankly, we're thinking about just taxing cars coming in from Canada. That's the mother lode. That's the big one. We're very unhappy with the negotiations and the negotiating style of Canada. We don't like their representative very much.
Trump's words may sting, but the Canadians are brushing it off. A senior official tells CBC News they see the comments as a negotiating tactic and that no request was ever made for a one-on-one meeting with the president.
We continue to have regular conversations whenever necessary, whenever we want to.
The Prime Minister is downplaying any suggestion his relationship with Trump is difficult, especially after cameras captured what appeared to be a snub at the UN yesterday, with the president not standing to shake Justin Trudeau's hand.
He was rereading his notes for his speech, the toast he was about to give. It was an interaction like so many are in UN, quick but cordial.
Trudeau had said NAFTA talks were likely to take place on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly. But after 2 days in New York City, there are no signs the trading partners are any closer to an agreement, even though the U.S. has set a deadline to get a deal done by the end of the month. Canada's ambassador to the U.S. told an audience in Toronto he sees a 50-50 chance of reaching that deadline.
I think it's really a question of whether or not the U.S. wants to have a deal.
Trump appears to want a deal, posing his own question of whether or not Canada wants in.
It'll be United States and Mexico.
Yes or no?
Canada will come along. Now, if Canada doesn't make a deal with us, we're we're going to make a much better deal.
CBC's Katie Simpson joins us now for another twist in this story. Just days away now from this NAFTA deadline, Katie, what do we think these comments are going to do to the mood in the negotiating room?
These discussions are already uncomfortably tense and very difficult, so it certainly is not going to help things whatsoever behind the scenes. And anytime there's an escalation in the public rhetoric like this, it makes it difficult for either side to really back down. Negotiators from Canada and the U.S., they are exhausted. This has been going on for 13 months now, and there's a sentiment starting to build in Ottawa that there is frustration that this is taking so long because so many of the big brains on Parliament Hill, some of the smartest minds in government, they are focused solely on this, and other issues that might need some attention aren't getting the attention they necessarily need. So there is a recognition they want this done soon, but whether they're going to meet that deadline, unclear.
Okay, the CBC's Katie Simpson in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, Katie.
Ladies and gentlemen, remain seated
That
as our
was
delegation
U.S. President
departs.
Donald Trump answering questions from reporters in New York for the last hour and 20 minutes. He covered a lot of ground, and we want to get to a lot of it. But first, I'm going to bring in Ellen Morrow in Washington. You've been watching this along with all of us here. Ellen, I think the big headline for our viewers is obviously what he said about rejecting a meeting with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the implications for NAFTA.
That's right, Vashi. And the president used some particularly strong language in talking about that. He was simply asked, did you reject a meeting? And his tone was really sort of flippant towards Canada, saying, yeah, I did, going on to say that he isn't happy with how the negotiations are going, very unhappy with negotiations, and taking a direct shot at Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland. He didn't name her, but President Trump said, we don't like their representative very much. We're not getting along at all with their negotiators, and that he personally does not like NAFTA. He also referenced something that's been reported in the past, although not verified, in terms of this threat that he makes when it comes about taxing cars. He said in this appearance that he's thinking about taxing cars. That would be the mother lode, and that would frankly be good for the United States. So some really strong language from the president on NAFTA, and again, attacks on Canada. He says that he will refuse to use the name NAFTA, that he wants to call the deal the USMC, but that he also said it will probably or possibly be USM if Canada does not make a deal. So perhaps some of the strongest language we've heard from the president directly on both how the negotiations are standing, and again, taking that direct, unflattering shot at Chrystia Freeland.
We're going to bring in the power panel now to assess what we just heard from U.S. President Donald Trump. Joining me in Toronto is Amanda Alvaro of Pomp and Circumstance, and here with me in studio, Tim Powers of Summa Strategies, political commentator, and former NDP MP Françoise Boivin, and our own Chris Hall, host of CBC Radio's The House. Hi, everyone. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to do a quick go around because then we want to get into the Canadian news as well. Amanda, why don't I start with you? Those NAFTA comments, I should say that our colleague Katie Simpson spoke to a senior source in the government who says that no meeting was formally requested, but obviously some very strong rhetoric from the president.
Very strong, but I mean, this is the second solo presser that he's held like this. So to hear it verbally from him versus the rants that we normally hear over Twitter, this isn't unlike the kind of comments that he's made previously. He's called the prime minister weak and dishonest. He's taken aim and shots at Canada over and over again. So it's not surprising to hear him use that kind of rhetoric. At the same time, though, it was definitely strong, and to then take aim at Chrystia Freeland and suggest that there was, this personal dislike. We don't like the negotiator, which also is a signal to the rest of us, to Canadians, that we're probably doing something right. We're pushing the right buttons. We're moving things forward. We're definitely not laying down or laying back on some of their demands. But then to use that auto card to make sure that, that auto card was played, and to call it the mother lode, it's like he has no limits, no boundaries to the kind of language he'll use.
Yeah, picking up on that, it was vintage
Trump, right? The only other politician, ironically, he mirrors in length is Fidel Castro. Perhaps he should study Castro. No, he went on for hours.
Did condemn socialism.
Though he did
During that hour and 3
condemn
minutes,
socialism. His supporters will love this performance. They will absolutely eat it up. His opponents will hate it. Question is, where are the people in the middle? And that really matters, I guess, as it gets towards the midterm. The only other point I would make at this juncture, picking up on something Amanda said, you know, he got a lot of questions about what kind of message are you sending to women by standing up for Judge Kavanaugh. And here in the same breath, and the rest of that press corps may not know it, he's slamming Canada's trade negotiator, who happens to be a leading woman around the globe. It's there's patterns there that are hard to miss.
Françoise?
I'm dead tired. I mean, that's the worst hour and 20 minutes in my life, honestly. But at the same time, it gave me a sense. I already follow what Trump is doing from one day to the other, so we have a good sense. He is true to himself, but I think that hour and 20 minutes really will be to study for years to come.
Totally.
It gives you such an indication. I just would love to be in the White House and see what a day, although he does seem to watch so much TV, I don't know if he's more quiet during those days, but it was absolutely amazing. Just from one to the other, in one sentence, he'd say something and then he'd say the contraire. It's incredible. I think he mixed up. I'm not sure it was an official meeting that was asked on the Nafta issue. I think we're all referring to that snubbing that he did at the UN lunch yesterday that I happened to catch on your show at the tail end, and I'm like, my God, did my prime minister just been snubbed by the president? And obviously he's in the doghouse. I'm so not. It infuriated me so much, Vashi, on the women issue, because he gives so much more credit. I all agree about the presumption of innocence, and that it might be tough, but at the same time, you have to give a certain balance, which he had zero of. He's more interested about himself and what he suffered in life and how he was accused. And I think it was, in my humble opinion, disgusting. And as the last question went, what about the message you're sending to young men? And to look at him again, defend Judge Kavanaugh, and make it all about himself.
Well, he was, to be fair, asked about the accusations against him the first time.
I know. But again, he could have become the bigger man, and because he almost recouped it when he talked about the fact that he's going to listen and watch. I do think his verdict is already in.
Chris, final word to you on this.
I often struggle to distinguish the Twitter president from the president. And I think today was the first time I've seen him in a setting like this, where he was the Twitter president, but in person. It's important for Canadians to look at this and wonder, in the art of the deal, which he always talks about, whether he has now made a conclusion that it's not possible to get a deal on his terms with Canada and what that might mean going forward. Clearly, he's suggesting he is prepared, whatever the cost might be to American workers and to Canadian workers, to slap a 25 or 15% tariff on cars, depending on what it is. That's the first thing. The second thing, I guess, is a personal insult. You know, this is a person himself who's been subject to smears, he says, and to barbs, yet he's perfectly willing to use them himself. So we don't like the trade negotiator. Well, so what? Make a deal. That's got nothing to do with it. I take Francois' point. She's a woman, and it's hard to escape that notion that this is partly personal for him. And to what extent, I guess my last point is, to what extent does his personal hubris, his personal animosity, his personal opinions about the people he deals with, how much does that influence the decisions he will ultimately make?
We continue to engage in near continuous negotiations. The conversations are constant and ongoing. We are very much looking in a positive, constructive way to getting to a renewed Nafta that will be a trilateral agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the United States. As I've said many times, I will not negotiate in public. We will continue to stay focused on getting a good deal for Canadians, recognizing that it is very possible to get to a deal that is both good for Canadians, good for Americans, and good for the entire continent. We will stay focused on that. We will keep working as long as it takes to get to the right deal for Canada.
Is it possible to get to that point even if the U.S. moves on with just Mexico in the short term?
We will keep working on a broad range of alternatives. A broad range of paths are ahead of us. We're going to keep focusing on trying to get to the right deal for Canadians as we move forward on negotiations.
Just returning to Ambassador Lighthizer comments yesterday, he said that the steel and aluminum tariffs will be dealt with separately from NAFTA. Do you think it's possible to reach a NAFTA deal without addressing those issues? And does Canada need to see some kind of ironclad commitment that Canadian auto exports to the United States won't be subject to tariffs or quotas? Thank you.
One of the things in my many conversations with President Trump on the issue of 232 tariffs writ large and indeed specifically was his insistence that, well, if we renegotiate NAFTA, if we get to a NAFTA deal, there will be no need to worry about these other things. That has been something that he has said a few times. We are continuing to work on getting to a right deal for Canada, right deal for Canadians, and that involves obviously feeling confident about the path forward as we move forward, if we do, on a NAFTA 2.0, and the freer and lack of punitive tariffs that we consider are unjust.
Mr. President, Susan Lee from Fox Business. Did you reject a one-on-one meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau?
Yeah, I did.
Why?
Because his tariffs are too high and he doesn't seem to want to move, and I've told him forget about it. And frankly, we're thinking about just taxing cars coming in from Canada. That's the mother lode. That's the big one. We're very unhappy with the negotiations and the negotiating style of Canada. We don't like their representative very much. They've taken advantage. I love Canada, by the way. I have so many friends. I have everybody. It's so many friends. But that has nothing to do with this. I'm representing the United States. Mexico was totally, I mean, they were great. By the way, the new president has been great. The deal is done. Now it has to go through Congress, and a lot of things have to happen. But we've done. Bob Lighthizer, who's here someplace. Where's Bob? Bob. Bob Lighthizer has done a great job of negotiating, as they have. But the deal is done. It's up to Congress. But Canada has treated us very badly. They've treated our farmers in Wisconsin and New York State and a lot of other states very badly. Dairy products, 300%. 300%. How do you sell a dairy product at 300%? The answer is you don't. What it is a barrier. It's basically they're saying, we don't have any barriers. By the way, it's 300%, so you don't send it in because you can't compete. So Canada has a long way to go. I must be honest with you. We're not getting along at all with their negotiators. We think their negotiators have taken advantage of our country for a long time. We had people that didn't know what they were doing, and that's why we had, over the last 5 or 6 years, if you average it out, we had $800 billion a year in trade losses. It's ridiculous. It's not going to happen.
What about NAFTA? Sir, Mr. President, NAFTA. What does that mean for NAFTA? Will you be pulling out of NAFTA?
I don't like NAFTA. I never liked it. It's been very bad for the United States. It's been great for Canada. It's been great for Mexico. Very bad for us.
Will you pull out of the
I'm not going to use the name NAFTA. I refuse to use it. I've seen thousands of plants and factories close. I've seen millions of jobs lost to auto companies that moved. I mean, Mexico has 25% of our auto business now because of NAFTA. Under our deal, it's not going to happen anymore. I hate to tell you, it's not. We're going to keep companies. And I told the Mexicans, I said, we have to keep companies, but they're getting a lot also. They're getting other things. They're getting a lot of good things. Mexico made a very good deal. But with Canada, it's very tough. What we're doing is, if we made a deal with Canada, which is a good chance still, but I'm not making anything near what they want to do.
But are you going to notify Congress of
what
pulling
we're
out of
probably
NAFTA?
going to do is call it the USMC, like the United States Marine Corps, which I love. General Kelly likes it even more. Where's General Kelly? He likes that. USMC, which would be US, Mexico, Canada. But it'll probably or possibly be just USM. It'll be United States and Mexico.
Yes or no? Are you
Canada
gonna-
will come along. Now, if Canada doesn't make a deal with us, we're going to make a much better deal. We're going to tax the cars that come in. We will put billions and billions of dollars into our treasury. And frankly, we'll be very happy because it's actually more money than you can make under any circumstance with making a deal. Okay?